Hey guys, it's Maddie and welcome back to my channel. We are going to be doing another reading wrap up. So all of the books I read in February, which is 13 in total. So a big reading month. I don't think I've ever read that many books in a month or even a year before. And of the 13 books, I actually only own 2 of them. The other 11 came from my public library. And I really appreciate my library, and it has a lot of options, so I'm very thankful for that. But let's get right into the first book. The very first book I finished in February is Love, Pamela by Pamela Anderson. It is her memoir, and I'm not going to rate memoirs. I've mentioned this before, but I am not qualified to rate someone's life and their experiences, nor do I want to. So I'm just going to give my thoughts on memoirs. One of my first thoughts about Pamela's book is that this woman knows what she wants and she knows how to get it. She goes after it. She lived such a fascinating life and I find her very inspirational. She worked hard for everything she got and she never took no for an answer and never backed down from anything. She has experienced so much in this world and she continues to do a lot of like humanitarian work and volunteering and just doing an outreach to her community. She loves hard and she loves fast. Like the amount of times this woman has been married, but that just shows how deeply she loves and cares for people. And I think it's very inspiring, like I said. Moving on, the second book is Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood. I think I was kind of harsh on my rating. I gave it 3 stars, but this was definitely my least favorite of Ali Hazelwood books I've read. It just was a bit too repetitive. I have my reading journal here just to reference, and I want to read what I wrote after I read this book. So it was a cutesy, nerdy romance with a happy ever after, but no deep connection to the characters. I just didn't feel emotionally attached to them. This book was trying to cover too many bases. A freaking gun, dress-coded, rubbing uglies, military, lawsuit, 5-kilometer run, cats, Marie Curie, miscommunication, murder, foreign, deaths. There was just so much happening in this book and it didn't feel like a lot of the storylines like followed through. They were just kind of there. But it was a really cute romance. It was happy ever after and my emotions weren't played with too much. The third book I finished is Shade of a Blood Moon, and I actually was honored to receive an ARC copy of this book, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the first half a lot more than the second half. I just feel like the last half was a little bit rushed in my opinion, but I still really enjoyed it. The plot, the spiciness, there's vampires and like kidnapping. It was very different from anything I've ever read before, but I thoroughly enjoyed my read. And it is now out for the public, so go to Amazon to check out this book. Number 4 is my favorite book that I read this month, and that is Caraval by Stephanie Garber, and I gave this book 5 stars, and I don't back down from that rating. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I loved how whimsical and magical it was, following Julian. I love Julian and Scarlett as Scarlett tries to play her way through Caraval and find her sister, Donatella, that's been kidnapped. It was just such a fun game and left me wondering, and I was just truly transported in this book. Number 5 is Talking as Fast as I Can by Lauren Graham. And again, this is kind of another memoir. We follow Lauren Graham mostly throughout her time working on Gilmore Girls and throughout her acting. We also get a little bit of a dive into her like personal life, but it's pretty professional and like her acting career. But she is such a fascinating person. I never knew she wasn't married and didn't have kids, but I love her mannerisms. I love the way she speaks, and I actually listened to this on audiobook and she narrates it herself, which made the experience so much more enjoyable. So if you do choose to read this book, I highly recommend the audio version of it. She knew how to tell such an interesting story and add little comments and remarks here and there that really added to it, and just I really enjoyed listening to her. Number 6 is Love and Other Words, and this book, again, I had a hard time rating because the parts I loved, I really loved, but the parts I didn't just kind of ruined it for me. So I did settle on 3 stars. I didn't love Elliot as a character. Honestly, he kind of annoyed me a lot of the time, and he was just like kind of overly there and kind of like not aggressive, but just really assertive, and I didn't love him. And Macy would just kind of go with the flow, kind of like let life happen to her and just went with where she ended up and didn't like actively pursue her own life. But they did have a really cutesy romance growing up in like a building relationship, which I enjoyed the past timeline a lot more than the present. But it shows two teenagers how their relationship changes as they grow up and start to experience the real world, and it was a happy ever after. But I would reread the book again, I think, if I'm like in a book slump and just need something happy and cheerful, but it wasn't one of my favorites. Number 7 was Legendary, and that is the second book of the Caraval series, and I gave this 4 stars. This book actually follows Scarlett's sister Donatella, and she is now playing in the game and a participant. At first, I didn't love it. I was kind of disappointed that we didn't get to see more of Julian and Scarlett, but quite quickly I fell in love with Donatella and Dante and their relationship and how it comes about, and it left me wanting more, and I just love that world that Stephanie Garber has built. This book really emphasized like the sacrifice, the love, and the loyalty between all of the characters. And then finally, we have Finale, which is the last book of that trilogy, and I gave it 4 stars. This book follows Donatella and Scarlett, and we actually get both of their POVs, which I really appreciated because like the first 2 books, you get to really understand them as characters and build that connection. And then Finale, you get a bit of both. I do think this book might have been a little bit too long. It could have been condensed a bit. There was kind of some filler that I don't think was necessary, but I still enjoyed it nonetheless, and seeing the conclusion to all of their stories. The 9th book I read this month is Twisted Games, and this is the second book of the Twisted series, but I think they're all standalone books, so you can kind of read them in any order. But I rated this 4 stars. It had a really good pacing to it. It felt like we were always moving along. I love the romance and the spice and the dynamic between our 2 main characters. Bridget is a princess who's trying to live a normal life, and she is assigned a bodyguard named Reese, and we follow their romance and their forbidden love and how I just loved it. Like the banter between the 2 of them. There was a lot of time jumping and time gaps, which it was mentioned in the like beginning part of the book that the first book, Twisted Love, kind of fills those time gaps, but nonetheless it didn't really affect my reading experience. I still really enjoyed it. And Protective Reese was hot as a fuck. Like he has the mentality of touch her and you die, and oh, it was so good. It was so good. But it also has like a background subplot of like the royal dynamic and being a part of a royal family and all of the chaos that comes with it. And book number 10 is The Book Thief. This book is set during the time of World War II in Nazi Germany and following actually a German family, a middle-class German family, which I thought was very interesting because you don't really see that POV too often. You see it from like a Jewish person's experience most of the time. But going into this book, you're kind of just expected to know what they struggled with and how they struggled. And now we're kind of turning it a bit and seeing how a German family also was struggling and making the choice between friends, your government, your country, and turning your back on your friends and on your neighbors and having to choose sides. And also taking risk for those that you love and just ultimately being in a very difficult position and also struggling with being poor, malnourished, the lack of resources. But Liesel is a young girl that we follow from her POV most of the book and how she goes through life being an orphan, getting adopted, and then all of her hardships that she faces. I gave this book 3 stars because I have read this before. I think I read it in like grade 5 or 6, but it was like not what I remember it being exactly. I almost DNF'd it quite a few times, but I don't know if that's because it was just a heavy book. There were points that it was kind of slow and dragged on because it's actually death narrating, and it's a little hard to get into and to kind of adjust to that perspective, but the book was still very impactful and hitting home for me, but it was just kind of slow, and it's a big book. It's a hefty book. Book number 11 I actually own, and that is Among the Missing. And if you have watched my other video, you know I did not enjoy this book. I gave it 2 stars. It was so slow, and I feel like a lot of it was pointless. It just never got anywhere. It follows 3 different people after they all have experienced the same tragic event, like a bridge collapses, and then it kind of shows the aftermath of their life from their experience, and how they're all, like, kind of the ripple effect, how they're all affected by the bridge collapsing and what they choose to do with their life after. It just was so boring, and I didn't like any of the characters. I didn't connect to any of them. I really didn't enjoy this book. Honestly, I'd probably even give it 1 star. The characters were just very secretive and shady, and didn't get to know them. Like, even as a reader, we didn't get to know them. Like, it wasn't even that they were just keeping secrets from each other. It felt like we as a reader were in the dark for a lot of it, and I don't enjoy that. Number 12 is Lessons in Chemistry. This book follows a female chemist in the 1960s and her struggles and hardships being a woman in chemistry and science, and how she is really judged and not treated fairly and just treated like shit, honestly. And she ends up sparking up a romance with one of the most famous, well-known male chemists, and they end up having a child together. And it follows the aftermath of a very unfortunate event and how it all plays out, and just how she is treated in her workplace and kind of swept under the rug for a lot of it, and then she's forced to make some decisions that she might not have and don't exactly align with her. I did enjoy this book and thought it was very unique, and I haven't read something like it before. It reminded me a lot of Ellis Gray and Richard from Grey's Anatomy when we get a POV from their time as like residents and interns. It does follow like merging timelines, and I enjoyed both timelines a lot, which doesn't happen very often. Like, I can't really pick a favorite. They were both very enjoyable. And even though this book is called Lessons in Chemistry, there was actually very little chemistry that had to do with the book, in my opinion. Like, she just happened to be a chemist almost, and it just didn't seem very believable or realistic. And the daughter was very smart, like almost too smart for her own good, which also not very believable in my opinion. And like the ending just felt kind of rushed, and that it was tried to be tied up into a pretty little bow, and I don't know how I feel about that, honestly. But I do give this book 3.25 stars. And my final book that I read in February is Happy Place by Emily Henry, and I give this book 3.75 stars. We follow this group of friends from college into adult life, and we focus in on a couple specifically, Harriet and Wynne, and following their relationship. They started dating in college, and then life moves on and their relationship blossoms and they become engaged, except there's one catastrophic moment that we don't find out about until like way at the end of the book that causes their engagement to be called off. But they don't tell anyone in their friend group because that would make things a little bit messy. So when they're all invited on one last hurrah at their other friend's estate, they need to pretend that they're still engaged so that no one catches on, and then they plan on telling everybody when it seems to be a good time, which obviously there is no good time. But there was so much miscommunication in this book, and I didn't find their relationship very convincing. Like, I don't know if they ever liked each other, to be honest. Like, from my opinion, didn't really seem like it. I also didn't really like the ending. I thought it was not how it should have ended, in my opinion. But I thought it was kind of cutesy, and I liked the friend group, and I liked the atmosphere and the vibes of the book. That is all for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye!